it's got to be a balanced view that gives a great financial outcome as well as a great customer experience. I've never met a customer experience improvement initiative that doesn't have a positive financial outcome, because bad customer experience costs.
So welcome to Unlocking Change Interviews. I'm super excited about this interview because in full disclosure, Laura, Mazin and I worked together. I was counting the years. It's somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago. But you've been doing a fantastic work. You've set up your own company, consulting in the customer experience space. And the last time we met, we're on a flight to Singapore, happened to bump into each other. You were going on to Malaysia to work with another large company. And, I think you're a sucker for punishment, but we'll talk about that as well. So welcome to this discussion. And Laura, do you want to just give us some of your background and how did you get here?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rob. It's great to see you again after these last few COVID years, and also to connect up on some really important topics. I guess my background is an interesting one. I started life off in IT many, many years ago, and that led me into the telecommunications industry. And I've come off the back of a 25-year wonderful career at Telstra, where I worked in almost every part of the business. I often say I never sold anything, but other than selling, I ran many parts of Telstra's operations, network operations, IT operations, worked in wholesale, worked in retail, worked in regulatory, worked in a bunch of different parts of the organisation. And I found myself in a position where I became the voice of the customer in big projects, like Telstra was doing a massive IT transformation. And I remember sitting around the table going, what about the customer? And I realized that there was an opportunity to bring much more customer-centric thinking and decision-making to the way we worked. And my timing just lined up beautifully with David Thodey becoming the CEO. And David was all about the customer and was very, very supportive of establishing a customer experience function. I'd have to say long before the words customer experience or CX ever became fashionable. I'm talking about 10, 11 years ago, maybe more. And so that's where I spent my last 7 or 8 years of my 25 years at Telstra, working in different shapes and forms of customer experience. When my time was up at Telstra after 25 years, I hadn't really realised that all that experience and knowledge I'd gained over the years was quite valuable to some other organisations in Australia, or really in the ASEAN area where we've worked over the last 6 years. And I founded my boutique customer experience consulting business. And we've been running hard and fast over the last 6 years, supporting different organisations to improve their customer experience. And that's different, depends who we're working with.
So I want to talk about the importance of David Thodey in a minute, but was there any other along that journey, any aha moments, what I call the red pill moments from the Matrix, that your lights went off? Was it people? Was it books? Was it problems? What, anything that sort of struck you?
Yeah, I don't think I appreciated it at the time, or valued it enough at the time, but there were probably two people who became almost my unofficial sponsors of my career. And I only realized that with hindsight, and in retrospect, I had no idea that was happening at the time. And both of them were quite instrumental in me securing promotions or securing different roles that broadened my career and my leadership experience. And I think that I didn't even realize I was ready for those roles. I don't think I would have gone for them. And I really think that fueled my own desire to help others in their careers. And I've only realized all of this in the last few years. I've never realized it all along the way, of both during the time when they were my sponsors, or when I was helping other people with their careers while I was at Telstra. But over the last few years, I've really reflected that I think people can make a huge difference and give you a bit of an awakening on on a different reality or a different path that you may not have picked for yourself.
I think that's really important. I think that there are so many good people out there that I've either managed or come across, and my job is just to open their eyes, to give them permission, because they don't know what they're capable of. You know, and I actually find the good people are the ones less understanding, and the not so good ones think they can do everything, and you know, you got to kind of have a different conversation. So that's interesting. Let's come back to David Thodey, who we both know. So he became CEO of Telstra. For the customer experience bit, how important was it to have that support from the very top?
It makes all the difference. And I've experienced it obviously at Telstra, but then since leaving Telstra and working with other organizations, change starts from the top. Cultural change is no small task and takes multi-years and significant investment of time and money. And I think the leader and the leader's behavior and what the leader's prepared to walk past or not walk past, the way in which the leader holds people to account for customer-centric or other-centric decisions, I think cannot be underestimated how important that is. So for me, David's leadership on the customer, his very first interview, I think he said he'd be famous for the customer, and then he walked the talk and walked in the shoes of customers very regularly. He set the standard for his leadership team, and there was no avoiding it. Since leaving Telstra, I'd say every organization that I've consulted to, if the leader is not bought in, and I have to give a little side comment, Rob. I'm so not a customer experience zealot. I'm not all about the customer experience. I'm actually all about successful business and successful customers. So we often find people who are just customer, and they forget there's actually a bottom line that companies need to deliver on. We take a very balanced view that you need to get a financial outcome, and you will also get a better customer experience at the same time. And David held his leaders to account on both of those things. And in my consulting business since then, we often find that leaders have somewhat a skewed perspective on one, often financial, dominant cultures of financial, or dominant cultures product, and they'd need some support and some guidance often to balance the dominance of one of those things along with customer. But to answer your question in short, absolutely critical that cultural change and leadership comes from the top.
So you kind of answered my next question, which was, in any company that you've been brought in and you didn't get that buy-in, was it like, thanks, but no thanks?
There's no way you'll succeed. And in fact, sometimes we will say to the organization, I don't think you need us here anymore. There's no point doing a whole lot of work and being paid money for it, a company investing in the work you're going to do if nobody's going to use it. Mm-hmm. So I often have the line, if you don't want us here, we don't need to be here. You've got to actually want to change and want to think differently. So yes, if a leader is so not bought in and they're just ticking a box, because don't forget, Rob, a lot of the posters, theoretical posters on the wall, because we don't work in offices much anymore, but those theoretical posters say customer experience is number one. And it's always in the top 3 in the strategy. And I worked with one company, the physical posters definitely had 3 equal number 1 priorities. And one of them was customer. And when I asked what sits underneath that, what's the strategy, what's the plan? Nothing. Mm-hmm. So there's no point posting that on the wall, literally, with nothing underneath it. So it's really critical that there's substance underneath it and that the leadership team have bought into that.
Once upon a time, I started collecting those posters, but they just, different words, same thing, just kept repeating itself. So I gave that up. I should go back and find, I've got them in storage somewhere, so I should go back and find that. Yeah. It's killing me here. The CEO of Southwest Airlines from a while ago, it'll come to me halfway through this interview, I'm sure. There was a passenger complaining, eventually got to their desk, and they sent a letter back, which was, "Dear so-and-so, we will miss you. Regards, da, 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 da." So it is that balance between the two. So what have you been your challenges along the way? What have been the highs and the lows as you've gone through all this?
Yeah. Look, over the span of my whole career, I'd say in the first half of my career, maybe the first third, when I really reflect back, Rob, I'd say the biggest challenge was actually being a young female in a very male-dominated tech industry. I do recall one role I had where we had 2% women, and I think I made up 0.5% of that 2%. I definitely faced the young female leader syndrome in sort of the early 2000s. That I'm glad that period of time is over. And there was behaviours we walked past and a culture that in today's time, I don't think anybody would put up with. I think my challenges in the latter part of my career at Telstra, and this goes for any big organisation, is how do you get stuff done in a big organisation? How do you effect change? How do you get stuff delivered? Often there's an agenda that's quite short-term focused, not multi-year, because leaders come and go, and so there's a small span of attention. I think the highs for me have to be the people that I've worked with over the years, people that I've learned from, and people who tell me that I've impacted their lives and their careers very positively. When I left Telstra, as many people, when you leave after being somewhere for a long time, you get all these lovely notes and messages of farewell. There was some in there that I just went, oh my God, I had no idea I made any difference to this person's life. And I actually really did. So I don't talk about this very often, but that's for me the absolute high, is making a difference for other people. But I've also learned so much from the people. And I don't like focusing on the lows, but I'd probably say the lows for me revolve around working with people whose values maybe don't match yours, or they don't live the values of the company that they've chosen to work for. And how you handle that, and you know, the level of discomfort. I'm not a fighter. I don't enjoy fighting with people, but I also won't walk past some things. So, you know, how you handle that and all that comes along with that. So that's probably the lows that people have. The highs is people have amazed me, and the lows is people have probably disappointed me along the way.
Have things changed for a young female in our industry?
It's I can't be sure, but I'd say they have, in the sense that I see far more young women speaking out and calling out behaviour and kind of what's acceptable, you know, calling out discrimination or calling out if something's happening that doesn't sit well. I think the younger generation have way more courage and imprimatur and permission to call it out than we chose to have. I don't think anybody put a lid on me speaking out, but it just isn't what we did years ago. So I think things have changed in the sense of speaking out. And I think that the workplace is a far more flexible working environment, certainly for women going off and having families and working part-time and working flexibly. So I think some things have changed. I think there's a very, very long way still to go, though.
I think you're right. We both have daughters, both lawyers, and yes, and I'm not, you know, I'm not the expert to talk about this stuff, but you just see it out there. So hopefully both of us, you and myself, have helped along the journey. I think a comment you made there, you don't know the impact you've made on people. So something I say to managers, leaders out there, it's no one's going to come really to you and say you're doing a great job or all that sort of stuff. But early in my management career, I was encouraged I had a box where if I got a good email or if I got something, I'd keep it in this box. And it's got all sorts of weird and wonderful things, you know, me on the front cover of Computer World in Moscow. Not that I'd go there at the moment, but, you know, just things like that to remind you that, because leadership can be very, very lonely.
Absolutely.
And so you just got to keep doing that. All right. What are you passionate about now? I think I know the answer, but what are you passionate about now?
If I said I'm passionate about customers, would you be surprised? I do feel my passion and where my talents lie are to surface customer experiences for those who don't have a voice to surface it themselves, and for organizations to see it in a different way. So at the moment, I'm very passionate about giving and making the opportunity for customer experiences not to be viewed as single one-off complaints, but to help organizations see the more systemic, bigger things that are happening to their customers, and help them understand what sits underneath that and what they can do about that. So I've really got quite a single focus and single passion right now to make a change to, I'm going to start off with corporate Australia. I hope it can go wider than Australia, but really make an impact on corporate Australia's customer experience. Whereas up until now, I would have said, I'm just passionate about customer experience and I'm consulting to some companies, but I think there's something even bigger that I can inform, and something bigger that I can impact.
So in your mission statement, I'm looking at the bold words you've got here is, balancing customer needs and expectations, strategic objectives and operational priorities, implement customer-centric solutions to improve the bottom line and customer sentiment while building capability. So that to me speaks to, this is not about any window dressing. This isn't about, hey, we've created a better laid out form for customers to fill in. This is, you want systemic change inside the organization.
Yeah. And look, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's got to be a balanced view that gives a great financial outcome as well as a great customer experience. I've never met a customer experience improvement initiative that doesn't have a positive financial outcome, because bad customer experience costs.
Yep.
And it might cost, or it might reduce revenue. I was meeting with somebody last week, Rob, who was saying that there's a lot of follow-up that they have to do with their customer base. And so that follow-up is delaying revenue, but it's also costing them to do all their follow-up, besides the customer experience of all their follow-up. So there's always a marriage between them. So you're right, we're not looking at tweaking a form or tweaking a letter. We're looking at the bigger systemic things and helping organizations understand the impact that they have on their customer base, but also the impact to their operational performance and financial performance. And I often ask the question, would you do that to your son or your daughter or your sister or your mother? Would you think that experience is okay for a relative of your own? And you'll see the CEO or the chief of marketing or whomever say, absolutely not. Then why is it okay to do it for 3 million customers?
Mrs. Fields Cookies in the US said, when they were baking the cookies in the stores, would you feed that to your children? Was the test. So by the way, I think Herb Callagher was the CEO of Southwest Airlines. I knew that would come to me as it comes through. You've been doing something really, I think, really great on LinkedIn at the moment. This has prompted me to reach out to you, right? So do you want to tell the audience watching this video what you've been doing? And you then posted your 3 lessons out of that and your follow-up. So can you share with us what you're doing there?
Absolutely. So part of the single focus of really giving people a voice to be heard by by organizations, we decided to share real customer stories. We picked 10. By the way, we had about 50. It's an endless number. We picked 10 customer stories to share. We did that over 10 days. And they were real customer stories, and we shared what the story was, how it made the customer feel, what the impact was to the business, what the contributing factors to the experience are. Because often people just point to the call center or the website, but there's a whole lot underneath. When you peel the leadership onion, as I like to call it, there's a whole lot underneath that. And then sharing just some key messages about that customer experience. And then, as you say, we then shared a summary of what some of the common themes were that came out of those stories. What we then did with each of the 10 was we wrote to, or it was actually 9, because one for privacy reasons we couldn't approach the company, but there were 9 stories where we wrote to either the CEO or a very, very senior executive. One company we actually wrote to the chair of the board because we knew her. And so we wrote to a very senior person in that organization saying, your company was featured in our story. We didn't name you. It wasn't about naming and shaming and blaming, but we wanted to spotlight your customer experience, which, by the way, some of them were positive. They weren't all negative. And here's a link to the story. And we're sharing it for 2 reasons. One, that you can read the story and perhaps think about it. And secondly, if you'd like our help, because, of course, I'm in business of my own, and this is exactly the kind of work we love doing. And so we've had 4 of the 9 circle back with us. We've met with 2 of them, and we've had 100% success rate of them taking us up on our help. But that's not the main reason we're doing this. We're doing this to give these companies a view of not a single complaint, but something way more systemic. We've actually also used AI to extract and analyze reviews, social media reviews of these companies. So we package up a bit of a story that says what we can learn from what your customers are saying. So it's not a voice of one customer, but all the customers. And from our experience, here are some things we would do, which is kind of breaks all my rules, because some of my rules rub around, we don't assume. We don't actually believe we know the answers. We come and listen and we tailor our work for you. And I'm breaking some of those rules to say, actually, we do know a fair bit, and we're going to put it on the table as a starting point. Of course, making it very clear that we don't know the details and have all the data that the organisation has. We've now had such great feedback from these stories. And by the way, it's not like who wants to just listen to a customer whinging? It's not a whinge story. It's actually really surfacing what's contributing to the customer experience that other organizations are learning from. So we've had all this feedback, lovely feedback from organizations and people we know to say, we're loving your stories, that we've decided to post 1 a week ongoing. And yes. I don't think we'll ever run out of stories. And in parallel, we're going to keep writing to the leaders and highlight what the voice of their customers are saying. It's been quite interesting. And by the way, the fact some haven't responded to us, somebody pointed out our emails maybe went to their junk mail, which is really possible. So we're looking at different ways of reaching people, because perhaps some of them truly have not read our email.
So a lot of questions out of this. So when I saw one update, you said 3 had responded. You're now saying 4, you've met with 2. And I think you put a comment in there about how inaccessible CEOs are or doing this. And they really do have this wall around them, you know, of they think they're out there meeting the outside world, but I really do think they have a wall around it. Is that what you're finding as well?
Yeah, look, I think that it goes back to a bit of the David Thodey conversation we had earlier. You know, it depends on the appetite and the mindset of the CEO. Some people have said to me, so there's one bank story, and it had 2 banks in the story. One was a positive experience, one wasn't. The positive experience bank is actually one of those that reached out to us that have asked us to help them on something else.
Right.
The negative bank story, we haven't heard back from them. And I know a few people sort of in the organisation of that bank, and they said, we think you've written too high up, too senior. And I said, I tend to disagree. Because if you take a David Thodey, who sat at the helm of one of the biggest corporations in Australia, he had time to read individual customer emails. So I think every CEO should devote a little bit of their time to connecting with customer stories. And I'm laying it on a platter for them. Here's a story, here's what underlay it, this is what it's about, this is what the impact is. So we're not giving up on the let's try reach the unreachable CEO, or sometimes, you know, chief of operations or chief marketing officer. But they are a little bit inaccessible. Some have responded directly and delegated, which is fine. Mm-hmm. They've said, thank you so much, really appreciate the feedback, please talk to my head. talk to my head of complaints kind of doesn't get it for me because you're still treating this as a complaint. But it's just fascinating to see the different behaviors. As I said, I don't want to be too harsh on the ones that haven't responded because perhaps we just haven't had the right channel to get to them. But as you know, me, Rob, I never give up. So we will keep on. I'll post physical letters if I need to. I'll go hand deliver if I need to.
So a few years ago, one of the major banks had an offsite, and I knew one of the people who worked there. And what they did was they did role plays where they had to call their own bank as a secret shopper, if you like, and then had to report back to this, large executive team workshop of what they found. And of course, it was very eye-opening, right?
Yeah.
I do a guest lecture each year at one of the universities here, and I actually use that. So I put up there all the phone numbers of all the major banks and, second tier as well. And I say, right, who should we call? And the students, they think this is funny for a start, but I get out my phone, I put it on speaker up to the microphone, and we go through the experience and what are they doing to us? Well, they're talking product, and I give them a role play. I'm going to be this person beforehand. So it's quite interesting. And I'd encourage people to be their own secret shopper out there, and then to call Laura Mazin and Achievable to go help sort this out. So let me go deeper now, right? You talked about, I want to change the systemic things. But you also mentioned one of the lows of your career was getting stuff done. Now, I've worked with the banks here. I've worked with, banks actually around the world, and they're just so hard to get stuff done, right? And, it's not just banks, it's telcos, it's insurance companies, it's all sorts of things. What's a month, a year, a day in the life of Achievable in trying to get stuff done?
So the place to start is who cares? And why? And I know, there's lots written about starting with why, but I truly mean, if you do not know who cares about customers having a better customer experience, and by the way, I often say every buck stops with the CEO. Of course, he or she cares, but besides the CEO, it's very often the CFO who should care, because it's costing him or her all this money that's not necessary. But who cares? Sometimes it's the head of contact centers. And why does the head of contact centers care? Because he or she is being asked to reduce their budget and their call volumes are going up because the experience is crappy. So they care because they can't meet their KPIs. But actually, everybody needs to care because all of them can't meet their KPIs. The person I was talking to about the follow-ups, he can't meet his KPIs because he can't close enough deals because they're still following up for documentation. He's a product manager. I can go through every arm of an organization and explain why every arm has a line of sight to the customer and impacts the customer. And very often they don't realize that. So there's a few things of how do you get stuff done. People have got to want to do it. You can't do things to people. So in the day, a year in the life of Achievable, what we try really hard to do is work out why should you care? What's the impact to you? What should you be doing as part of your portfolio? Because of course, organizations do have silos and they do have different departments, and we'll come back to that, no doubt. So firstly, who cares? Why should you do this? And then how are you going to be held to account? Because there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of words, but ultimately, who's holding who to account that you actually take action and deliver a better customer experience? And you can hold people to account in many, many different ways, including incentives and governance and dashboards and meetings and all those lovely things. But ultimately, it starts with the head. It starts with the leader who sets the tone that this is important, who puts in place KPIs that are shared to some degree, and that gives people an understanding of why they need to be doing it and holds them to account. The last comment I'll make on this is you have to bring people on a journey. We never, ever do things to people because then we've just done it to them and they don't care. We do things with people, and we bring people on a journey to understand why this is going to actually be better. Because let's be honest, Rob, everybody's a little bit what's in it for me. And if you can articulate the what's in it for me, for that store leader, for that branch manager, for that digital app owner, for whomever it is, it then starts to translate into something a bit more meaningful that they can take action on. So my last point is bringing people on the journey, which takes time. You can't just click your fingers and say, let's make change.
So you mentioned 3 letters, CFO. I always say there are 2 powerful voices inside in a company. One's muffled though. The first powerful voice is the CFO, finance. We got to make our numbers, expenses, all that sort of stuff. The other one, which is muffled, is the customer. And it's muffled because it's outside. And I know, if some senior manager's got some great idea or something and they're driving me nuts, I go and take them out to meet the customer, right? Mm-hmm. Why don't you share that with the customer and go from there? Talk to me about that. Is that something you do it's on your website, Voice of the Customer, and you're using tools and all that sort of stuff. How do you bring that in and what impact does that have?
Yeah, look, I find a lot of leaders will say, we know what the customers need. I worked with an organization a couple of months ago, and they did not need to do any more listening to customers. They knew. And I kind of said, well, if you know, why haven't you fixed it by now? It's obviously not that impactful to you. So the voice of the customer, which doesn't need to be an audible voice, of course, it can be sourced from the data every organization already has about customers. How many times they call, what they do next, then what. So there's so much data we already have without asking customers. I'm not sure about you, Rob, but I'm very tired of surveys. We get surveys just for breathing these days. We get surveys for walking out of a store. In fact, I was on the call with somebody yesterday and I got the survey before my call ended, literally. That's the first time that's happened to me. Most people are over giving formal feedback. I think there'll always be a place for it, but I think there'll be less over time. So the voice of the customer, going out and talking to a customer, listening, putting headsets on and listening in a call center to customers calling in, standing in a store and just observing. And of course, reading feedback, looking at the data you already have. I think that speaks mountains, if that's the right saying. It tells us so much about what customers are experiencing. You then put that and balance that with your strategic priorities and your financial objectives and all those other things. That tells the whole story. So you're right, it is a bit of a muffled voice in some organizations. In others, it's front and center. What the customer, that they get it. They get that what the customer's experiencing is actually quite a lead indicator for a whole lot of their other metrics and other objectives.
I think you make a really, really good point, because as economists will tell us, the problem with surveys is it's self-reporting.
Yeah.
And there's one thing that customers, say, but what's more telling is what they do. And that data that you find, you actually can find, holy moly, is this really going on?
Yeah.
And it is sitting there, but it so rarely gets surfaced.
And there's technology and AI that exists now over the last 3, 4, 5 years that will help you visualize your customer's journey through a particular phase. So, in the old days, dare I say old days, we used to do journey maps. We used to draw what we thought the customer was doing. But listen to my words. It was what we thought the customer was doing. And then as you laminated it and put it on the proverbial wall, it was out of date because then something else happened. Whereas technology today, and I'm not wedded to any one particular technology, but technology today will allow you to visualize what customers are doing and where they're going around in circles and where they're dropping off and where. So you've got the data. You have access to that data. Every organization has access to that data. So I'd love to see more of using the data you already have and less bothering customers to fill in small percentages of survey responses.
I want to move on and talk about silos and the sort of stuff that you'll find up on our website, Unlocking Change. But you used a phrase which I'm really curious about: leadership onion. Tell me about the leadership. What's leadership onion?
Yeah. So for me, there's so much that a leader has, such responsibility that a leader has, that you almost need to peel back to get down to what it is that a leader can impact. And at the highest level, they set the strategy, they do all these lovely things, but ultimately it's what they focus on, what they prioritize, how they behave, whether they ever talk to a customer or not, their role modeling. And so there's, might be strange terminology, but there's a whole layers and layers of leadership work to be done by a leader. I think that as it relates to silos, Rob, I think what we see is each leader has their accountabilities to the CEO or to the boss, and they have their KPIs and they share that with their own teams. But customers traverse leaders' KPIs and leaders' silos. Customers traverse the whole organization. They actually don't care how you internally organize yourselves. So there's this mismatch between organizational structures and leaders and KPIs and customers who just simply want a job done, simply want to complete a task. And that's where I think we start to get out of sync between what matters most to customers versus what matters most to me as a leader who's got incentives and KPIs.
I was at an Agile conference a couple of years ago, and one presentation was about maze runners. So this is people who had to run through the maze of the organization to get anything done. I thought it was brilliant, a brilliant analogy and what that was. I think you're absolutely spot on. And in, I think, chapter 2 of Unlocking Change, the bookcast, we talk about that and we share examples and stuff like that. How are we going to fix this? How are we going to fix this? Because you're right, you'll never stop publishing customer experience stories. How are we going to fix this?
Look, I think there's an awareness. Number one answer to your question is awareness. Bringing and raising the awareness of leaders, and I mean top of companies, CEOs, CFOs, as you've said, giving them an awareness of the impact of their current decision and their current priorities. So that's our first wave of sharing stories on LinkedIn and contacting and communicating with leaders. After that, it's really helping them work out how to prioritize what the big few things, because there's so much that could be done, so much, it is endless. And they've got limited resources, both people and financial resources. So then how do you prioritize? And our 2 guides on prioritizing always around impact and number of customers. So how impactful is it, and how many customers can you impact with that? So small example, I tried to do a change of address for one of my business banking accounts, and I had to physically go into a branch with a piece of paper for no reason on earth. The guy said, "Oh, thank you, I'll scan it and send it off for you." That's like the tiniest impact, tiniest process, but it would impact so many customers for the change of address activity. So now where does that sit relative to lots of other transaction types, lots of other things that customers experience? So for me on the day, that was very impactful. But in the scheme of things, that probably isn't the greatest priority for some of these organizations. Their app working a whole lot smoother, or, things that every customer experiences every day is going to get a higher priority. So I think awareness, prioritization, and then holding people to account to actually deliver change. Because up until then, we've just been chatting and writing documents. Then you've got to actually execute. And you and I both know the stats on how many strategies ever turn into reality. So how do you, I don't even like calling them strategies, I call it your strategic priorities that have action plans underneath them. And then how do you hold people to account to actually deliver them?
In Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, he brings up the broken windows theory, which was, if you walk past a building with broken windows, no one cares, so you'll do graffiti and you'll do this. So instead of trying to do the big strategic change, and haven't we seen that a number of times across organizations, it's about just fixing the change of address, fixing this. And they're small, simple things that you can get wins. And it has such a flow-on effect to the employees, right? They don't have to, they're seeing change as opposed to, we've got the 3-year plan, let's go, and all that sort of stuff.
I think you have to do both. I think you do need to work on big strategic and systemic things. You also have to make some of these small 1%ers because it does have to feel like a better place to work for your employees, because we know happy employees help give you happy customers.
So I tried to join a webinar last night out of Europe. Patrick Hooverstadt was putting one on systems thinking and creating agile organizations. And I mucked up the time zone because for some reason it was in the Finnish time zone and I assumed UK, but I'll follow that up. And so I agree with systemic, et cetera, et cetera. I think that to really create the change, we've got to change the organizational structure. We've got to get out of the silos. And that's something that people don't question enough, right? Now, when you and I worked together, you invited me to present at one of your workshops. So you find people who understand this are reaching out to other areas and including them. And, that was great in doing that. So a belated thanks. But, how can you keep doing that more? All right, we're nearly out of time. You've covered a lot of stuff, some great things in there. Leadership, the leadership onion, creating systemic change, getting stuff done. And I'm going to follow with interest your progress of your publishing these stories. And I like it's not name and shame. Yeah. It's that's so negative. It's, hey, we're trying to help. So I really like that. What would you like to leave the audience of this video? Advice, guidance, thoughts. What would you like to leave them with?
Yeah. Perhaps just a couple of thoughts, Rob. I think a lot of how we do the work we do comes down to principles and what you hold yourself to account for, the way you operate. What are the principles that guide you? And I've sort of come back to that. Would you be okay or feel proud if whatever you're doing is done to your mother, sister, brother, uncle? And I think if your principles are to keep people informed and be honest and transparent and timely and communicate and really open the kimono a little bit, it brings people on the journey of change and helps people understand where they fit in and what their role is. Change is hard, and organizations fronting up to the fact that even some of their experiences aren't good enough, some of the way they work isn't good enough, is hard. It's a hard pill to swallow. So I think the job that you and I and others have is to help build that awareness, help build that understanding, and turn it into real action rather than just jabber away for hours and days. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the subject with you here, Rob, and I think you're doing fantastic work to highlight all of these challenges and start the conversation.
Thank you very much for that. And thanks for your time today. It's been great. I'm hopeful that people will be on your website and trying to find it out. It's achieve-able.com.au. I'll look for Laura Mazin, M-A-Z-I-N, on LinkedIn, and you'll see these great stories. So really appreciate your time and thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. All the best.